Reporting on what the mainstream media won't, you're listening to the HAGMANN and HAGMANN Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Exposing the New World Order, you're listening to the HAGMANN and HAGMANN Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stand by. Doug and Joe will be back shortly.
Welcome to this edition of the HAGMANN Report. You know, one of the issues, or one of the events in American history that we still talk about is Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City bombing. Now, granted, we don't have the truth from Las Vegas. We don't have the truth from 9/11. We certainly don't have the truth, I don't believe, from Oklahoma City. Now, just to be clear, and out of 100% transparency, I had worked with Jana Davis and attorney David Shippers, and Shippers was the guy who was the head lead counsel for the impeachment of Bill Clinton. And we looked into Oklahoma City, and she wrote a book called The Third Terrorist. Now, that's just introducing me. And that was back in the early 2000s. And then Joe and I took a trip to Boston where we looked the third terrorist, the Hussein al-Husseini, in the eyeballs, and his associates in the eyeballs, and saw that there was no souls there. Now I'm hearing, wait a minute, it's not the whole story. So there's a gentleman by the name of Cody Snodgress. He's with us. He was former. Well, I'm going to let him. I think we're going to let him give his background. I've got 3 pages of background on him, but to make this a little bit better, I think I'm going to let him tell us who he is and the information that he's got with respect to Oklahoma City. Cody, welcome to the program.
Oh, it's great to be here, and hi to everybody out there. We appreciate this opportunity. Before we get started, I always make a disclaimer. 1982 Intelligence Identities Protection Act, the IIPA, U.S. Code Title 50, Sections 421, 426. It states the disclosure of a U.S. government operative's identity is illegal only if it's done intentionally and with knowledge that the government is still actively maintaining a cover for such operative. And we do this because of the case you probably remember in January 2013, CIA case officer John Kiriakou was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison for inadvertently letting out an operative's name when he was discussing the CIA's RDI program, the Rendition, Detention, Interrogation Program at Gitmo. So we always just do that as a disclaimer.
And to our end of that I'll just say what he said. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Ditto, what he said. Listen up.
Right.
We adhere to the same disclaimer. All right.
Right.
All right, cool. And thank you for doing that. Tell us about
yourself. Yeah,
because
all we want to do, we talk about some of the people, some of them are dead, and the ones that are still around, or, we don't use their names, so we just do the best we can.
And that's all we can do. And, we're in this to get to the bottom of things. And from an investigative standpoint, our investigative standpoint, this is all we want to do is get to the bottom of things. We don't want to get we don't want people peeing on our legs and tell us it's raining outside. Okay, I'm telling you, man, and I'm damn pissed off, and I'm sorry if I'm allowed to say that, right? That's FCC compliant. I am angry at the fact that we are not getting the truth on anything, that we can't trust the government on anything. And we've been lied to for years upon years upon years. Look, we are adults in this country. Tell us the truth. And let's find the truth. And you're one of the truth tellers I hear out there, and I've been hearing so many marvel. I mean, you've been just making your claims. Now, look, I'm kind of biased on this subject. When I say biased, that doesn't mean good or bad. It just means that I've got a lot of information that I think I know that I could be proven wrong on. So, but anyway, getting back to the point, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience as well, your background a little bit, and then let's get right into the subject.
Yeah, we got an hour right now, so I'm going to skip a whole lot of stuff about the background. But in 1974, I graduated from high school and scored in the top 1% in the SAT test in physics in the whole nation. And I was the number one on the tennis team. I got a full scholarship. CIA came to recruit me later in 1975, but I had already been doing black ops before I even talked to them with some Vietnam veterans that came back from the war, and they also worked for CIA overseas. So anyway, you fast forward through the time, I graduated with a double bachelor of science degree in mathematics and physics, and then I went into graduate school and to work on my master's of science in physics. And after graduate school, I worked for Chevron Geosciences, and we're fast forwarding in 1980. I was a petroleum and research geophysicist at Amoco Production Company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, that was in 80, 81, and in 82 through 85, they began the covert operations over in Arkansas, and Tulsa was real close to that. And I was involved in one of the ops. It's called Centaur Rose, a CIA op, and that came when President Reagan, he went around Congress. They had passed the Bolin Amendment, back in 84, February of 84. And that was to regulate our troops and no troops down in the regional conflict in Nicaragua with Daniel Ortega, who was the president of the Sandinistas, the communist-backed, and then we were back in the Contras. So we were right in the middle of all those ops. He ordered CIA director to aid them without Congress's knowledge. So they moved the weapons down there and then paid for the operation with the drug money and stuff. So we were in the middle of all that when Bill and Hillary Clinton were there, and that's a big subject. So anyway, fast forward into 1991, and I died in another operation. It's Project Slammer, it was called. It was, I died twice in that operation. They shocked me back, and I made it back. And by that time, after all this time, I was ineffective. I'd been hurt and had broken ribs and a lot of nerve damage and different things during all these ops. And anyway, in 94, in October, I was approached by another operative. His name is Harold Leonard. I can use his name. He's dead now. And Harold Leonard, we went out to a rural area under the trees, and he had a backpack with $500,000 in cash in it. And he said, "We've got a job for you." And I said, "Which country are we going to?" I thought it was Saudi Arabia or something. We'd had job offers over there with the royal family guarding their kids and stuff. And I said, "Where?" He said, "No, it's here." And I said, "Well, what kind of building is what kind of job is it?" He said, "It's an EOD job, explosive demolitions." I said, "Okay, what's the target?" And he said, "It's a domestic building. It's a federal building." what? And he said, yeah, it's a federal building. This was October of 94. So anyway, I went off on him, and I said, which building is it? He said, it's the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And I was at the end of my career anyway, and I knew it was a patchy job right off the bat, especially for such a low amount of money.
What's that?
Said, well,
what's an Apache job?
A patsy job. A patsy job is one like McVeigh took. You know, it's where you're
a patsy. Patsy.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I'm talking too fast. I'm sorry. But anyway, he said $500,000 now and $500,000 when the job is done and so forth. So I said, no, I'm sick of this stuff. I'm having bad dreams at night. I had severe PTSD. I was drinking heavily to cover my PTSD, and I had a lot of broken ribs and injuries and stuff. And I said, I can't take this anymore, and I'm not doing it. And that's the point at which I turned from CIA asset to a liability. So you fast forward through time, and I'll get to the end of this real quick because we only got an hour. But when the building went off later in April 19th of 1995, I went down between Tulsa and Oklahoma City to some old safe houses that we had used during the CIA operations over in Arkansas. Way back in the 80s. And we'd been moving arms out of the armories and all that stuff. We'll get into all that later. But anyway, so I left the country for a while. I came back. I was afraid they would kill me because I had operational knowledge of this black op. And so by the time I got back, McVeigh and Nichols had been indicted and arrested. And so you fast forward through that to 1997. And I was in Colorado Springs, Colorado with, there was an ATF DEA undercover operation called Operation Stingray. It was a code name. And in that operation, I met ATF agent Blake L. Butler. He would later get the nation's top cop award from Vice President Al Gore and United States Attorney General Janet Reno at a D.C. dinner party. And I found out later that Blake Butler had been at the Waco Branch Davidian compound when they had the gunfight back on February 28th of 93. And he was also at the Ruby Ridge Randy Weaver standoff where Vicki Weaver had been shot. And then he was also supposed to be working at the Murrah Building on the day it was bombed, but he magically didn't call in. So I had been in this operation with him for 2 years. And to make a long story short, back on April 20th of 99, this is 2 years into that op, they had the Columbine High School shooting. And that was in Littleton, Colorado up here, and it was the biggest high school shooting in U.S. history. It's a big deal. And so on April 22nd, I met Agent Butler at the ATF undercover residence in the Springs. And there was Bill Clinton and Janet Reno all over the TV. You know, had their little photo op for the gun thing. And so we started talking, and he asked me about that. And I had some people for the Defense Intelligence Agency I worked with, Captain Glenn Wilson from Vietnam. He was with Janet Reno as head of No Narcotics down in Dade County, Florida, when she was the DA down there before Clinton bumped her up to the White House. So anyway, they were on TV, and we started talking. And I didn't know we were on 4mm hidden cameras. And so I started blabbing my mouth about all these old CIA ops in Arkansas with Bill Clinton and Hillary and the PD file rings and the drugs and the arms and the Rose Law Firm and the whole thing. And then I also told him the job of how the CIA had offered me the job to bomb the Murrah Building for $1 million. And he started fidgeting around because I didn't know at the time, but he had been at the Murrah Building, supposed to be there that day. And anyway, so they planted me with fake evidence, okay, and then arrested me on October 7th of 99. And the CIA came from D.C., and they asked me direct questions about Bill Clinton. And then they turned me over to the FBI, the ATF, DEA, and the IRS. Well, they put me in front of Judge Edward Nottingham, and he had been nominated to his judgeship in the 10th Circuit Federal Court up here in Denver by none other than ex-Director of Central Intelligence George Bush Sr. And then the prosecutor on the case was none other than Tom Strickland. He was directly appointed by Bill Clinton to be the United States Attorney in the 10th Circuit. So the fix was in.
Talk about a pucker factor there. I don't mean to interrupt, but you got at that point you got to know. Holy crap! I mean,
it gets deeper. I'm giving you the short version. Tom Strickland had been at a Denver law firm with Brownstein, Hyatt, Faber, and Strickland. Now, Norman Brownstein was the principal partner of this law firm. Later, we found out that Norman Brownstein was in the CIA's Council of Six Attorneys in the 1970s when George Bush Sr. was Director of Central Intelligence. So the fix was in here in the court. That's why they brought McVeigh up here, so they could rig the trial. And we have, in this book, it's 700 pages. It has tremendous amounts of documentation. We've got 20,000 pages of discovery evidence. We have ATF DEA tapes. I snuck tape recording equipment through all the metal detectors and x-ray machines inside the U.S. Attorney's office. And I have the nation's top cop asking me if I ever worked for the CIA and stuff. I tape recorded all of them. This stuff's never been out in public. The stuff about Waco and a lot of this stuff, no one's ever heard these stories. But it's an amazing story. So the short version is they threw me 3 cells down from Timothy McVeigh. I had a perfect record, no traffic tickets, no drugs, no violence, and they planted me with evidence, okay? And then they put another guy in there named Kerry James Gagan, and he took a van load of C4 plastic explosives from his CI handlers in Denver down to Trinidad. Building went up. And his contacts were 3 Middle Eastern men, and he eyewitnessed plans to the Murrah Building in English with them. He got spooked. He went back up to the Secret Service office in Denver and told them, hey, there's something weird. I think I'm going to be a patsy. I don't know what's going on. I did my job, and I don't like these Middle Eastern guys or something weird. And so anyway, CIA got wind of it. They planted his house with evidence, and the FBI arrested him. So they had me and Kerry James Gagan and Nichols and McVeigh all up there, the people that were the principals of the Patsy operation. And we'll talk about the real operation here later. So anyway, make a long story short, after all this, they had me there. They stripped out my bed. I was sleeping on concrete. All I had was a pair of skivvies. I didn't eat for days. I thought the CIA was going to poison me to kill me. And then I was there the day they took McVeigh out, and then later he was executed at the Terre Haute FCI, the Federal Correctional Institute, Terre Haute, Indiana, on June 11th, 2001. And I know some people that sat on the front row and watched that execution and so forth, so we can talk about that later. But anyway, Kerry James Gagan was told by Judge Nottingham pre-trial to go to the Springfield, Missouri FCI, the Federal Correctional Institute there. They have a medical facility and a mental facility. And that's the favorite thing. See, Judge Nottingham was a CIA judge. He was nominated by CIA director. Every case that went to him in the 10th Circuit was steered. They used something called the PROMIS software in the DOJ, the Justice Department, and it correlated all the cases. Anyone that had CIA or NSA contacts, national security cases, were all steered to him, and he made sure they never saw the light of day. His favorite trick was to send the inmates for a mental evaluation pre-trial, make sure they're fit to stand trial, of course, and then they'd give them the juice, put them in straitjackets, and scramble their minds so they could never talk about the CIA. And so the fix was in here, and so I went 4 years. I never had a motions hearing. Any hearings they had were sealed. They kicked the court transcribers out. It was a classic CIA case. And after 4 years, then Judge Nottingham finally said, well, you can have a motions hearing on July 24th of 2003. And so that was the final hearing. He said, if we don't have a hearing, we're going to dismiss the case. So 2 weeks prior to that, on July 7th, 2003, I was cleaning my car's windshield at a Walmart parking lot in Colorado Springs. My wife was shopping, and I never saw it. I just heard it. We had hired a tape expert, William Valentine, that had coffee with Clinton and Bush and Reagan all in the White House. He was a CIA tape expert. His job was debugging the White House. We hired him, and we had absolute proof that they tampered with tapes, planted with evidence. So the ATF division and DEA in Colorado Springs were all going down when we got this evidence. They were all going to prison. And we had 100% irrefutable evidence. So 2 weeks before this hearing, I was cleaning the windshield on my LTD car in Walmart, and I heard a motor revving tire squealing, and I was leaning across the hood of my 1990 Crown Victoria LTD, and the impact, it totaled my LTD in the parking lot while it was parked. I have all the police reports and all the stuff. It knocked me back up in the air, and I landed on the top of a roof of another car, rolled over the hood, bounced off the passenger fender of another car, and hit a concrete light pole. And my doctor told me I was very, very lucky to be alive. So 2 weeks after that, I was in an outpatient physical therapy unit when I got out of the hospital, and I was leaving that walking on a cane. And I came around my car, and there's a Colorado Springs police cruiser sitting there with the motor running, and they floored the motor and charged me in the parking lot, sparks flying when they jumped the curb. It swerved sideways, and about 4 feet away from me, sitting in there in a Colorado Springs police uniform, was none other than the nation's top cop, ATF agent Blake L. Butler. He was one of the guys that was fixing to go to prison, and he shook his finger at me and threatened me, and then floored the car and took off. So I was pretty shook up. I'm almost done here. And I went home, and I was watching a movie with my wife and kid later that night, and up in my yard pulls up an SUV. And I looked out. I didn't know who it was, and I thought it was the CIA who's going to kill me. And I didn't want my young son to see his father get shot. So I went in there. I went down there. I was ready to die. I didn't take a gun. I didn't take anything. And I walked around the window. They rolled the window down, and it was Harold Leonard, the guy that offered me the job to bomb the Murrah Building for the CIA. And I said, "What's up?" You know, he said, "Look, this court thing," he said, that we had got orders to kill you if you go talk about any of this. And then he pointed up at the house where my wife and kid were, and he says, "We've got orders to kill your family too." So after that, I called my attorney the next day, Harvey Steinberg. He's the Denver Broncos attorney. He's a great attorney. And I told him, "Look, I want to change my plea." And we met in the 10th Circuit with United States Assistant Attorney Greg Goldberg. And he said, "Pick a charge, any charge, and you're out of here." He said, "Just plead guilty to something. I don't care what it is." He said, "I'm getting a lot of heat on this case. I don't know what's going on, but it's something big, and I don't want anything to do with it." So I pled guilty to dealing firearms without a license. I didn't even know what charge it was. I just pointed to it. It's a ridiculous charge. So I managed to get out, and I made up my mind if I could ever get away from this and get away from them, and the Clintons would get out of office, and Hillary be out of Secretary of State, then I could tell this story. And so I've come forward now to do that. Now,
okay.
It's a short version, and I'll answer any questions because we only got the rest of the hour. So.
Okay. Now, well, I want to ask you something about this because you've got a story to tell. You've got a book out that chronicles that story called Choosing the Light, correct? That's your book. All right.
It's Choosing the Light, Dark Secrets of the Oklahoma City Bombing.
Okay. All right. And this is a book that I don't have yet, but I intend to get tonight. All right. That's just so, and I want everyone to know that. And sight unseen, I would recommend it. Just because of what I heard just now and what I know of you, because we do our backgrounds on, I guess, to the extent possible, and just having heard you before. Now, the second part of this is, you're right. We only have really about 40 minutes left at the top of the hour. However, our third hour guest, Andale, folks, is not going to be able to be on with us tonight. So, Cody, I'm going to extend the invitation to you.
That's great, because okay. There's so much to all this, like the story of what really happened at Waco. Tim McVeigh was there.
See, okay, and I think we'd be doing our listeners a disservice to condense this too much.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So if you're game, we're just going to take it right through the second hour.
Yeah, right to 10.
Right to 10 o'clock Eastern. We only have one break, a 3-minute break at the top of the next hour. So, knowing that, I'm just going to let you. Well, I'm going to ask you. The reason you're coming forth now is because the Clintons are out of office, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And and why else? I mean, you still have the permanent state deep state still active, but why now? Why coming forward now?
That's a good question. I think America's at a precipice, and this is a battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness spiritually. And mean, I've sat for years. I was a black operator. I spent most of my time wearing black ski mask and double plastic surgeon's gloves with Nomex over them. I was involved. I was hired to bodyguard Barry Sadler down there in '88 when he was assassinated in Guatemala City. I've been in Panama. I've been in, my girlfriend had dinner with Pablo Escobar down in Miami. I've been all over and done all these black ops and seen them from the inside. And we kept our mouth shut. We had to maintain operational integrity and keep a minimum of blowback to our principals. But after all this time, and the way when they planted me with evidence and all to shut me up, I believe that Bill and Hillary Clinton had direct knowledge and were directly involved in the bombing of the Murrah Building. And I know what they were doing in Arkansas because I was there, and I can talk for a long time. The Clintons are, in my opinion, the worst criminal man and wife team in the history of the United States. They're much worse than Bonnie and Clyde. And they've hid behind their position as governor in Arkansas and as also as president of the United States, and then Hillary as senator in New York and also as secretary of state. I know the true story in Benghazi. One of my associates was there that night and engaged in the firefight. He's not at liberty to talk because he signed his standard non-disclosure agreement, but he told me directly, right in my ear, what really happened there. And so those two are guilty of so many crimes, treason, murder. It goes on and on. And I think that our country has to take down this shadow government, and we have to expose it, or we're going to lose the United States forever. Donald Trump has a chance now with all these secret indictments that are coming out to kind of drain the swamp. And I'm hoping that my information, my eyewitness accounts, and the things that are in this book, I could not ever publish this book and turn it over to CI's PRB, that's the CI's Publication Review Board. Mm-hmm. Every agent or case officer and or asset that signs a national security oath, part of that oath is that if they write a book, they have to have the PRD, Public Relations Board, go through it. And then, of course, they chop out all the good stuff. And so I had to do this book opposite, and I wrote it, took 4 years to write, and then I had to get out with the interviews first and then get the book publishing later. Most people publish them first, then do the interviews. If I'd have done that, this book would never see the light of day, and I probably wouldn't be here right now because there's a lot of real sensitive stuff in it. But anyway, that's why I came forward, is because our country has been going down the tubes. And the Clintons, even with the Clinton Foundation in Haiti, they had that Dr. Lorich, you probably know about, up in New York. They just found him stabbed. Yeah. Said it was suicide. And he was going to talk about the $30 million that the Clintons were supposed to give to the people in Haiti, and the kids never got it. That's a big CIA station down there in Haiti. They wash all kinds of drug money. The Clintons Foundation is a whole money laundering scheme for everything, and we talk more about all that later. But yeah, that's the main reason. It's time for us to stand up for our veterans. And the real reason why the Oklahoma City was bombed has to do with our Gulf War syndrome and our veterans and the massive cover-up. There's multiple stages of cover-ups here.
All right. Well, and so and you've got the floor. I'm interested in why our government would want to bomb one of our own buildings. Obviously motive being number one, but you know what, you've got the floor. Just take it.
Okay. So yeah, we'll skip to that. To do that, and for the audience out there, some of them might be younger, we have to go back in history just a little bit, so bear with me. Back in 1980, and through the 80s, while we were conducting, there were 3 multiply nested ops in Arkansas, Jade Bridge, Screwworm, and Centaur Road. And while all that was going on over here, Saddam Hussein, he was a paid CIA asset in Iraq. And a lot of people don't know that, but he was. And so they had the Iraq-Iran war, and Iran at that time enjoyed about a 10-to-1 infantry advantage over Iraq. So we were worried that they would overrun Saddam. So the U.S. secretly armed them in the Reagan administration. 2 primary things they armed them with was the Hawkeye 123C cluster bomb. They set up a company in Argentina. They stole the plans for our stuff, gave it to a guy. All this is detailed in the book. I have dates, names, times, bank accounts, everything. It's highly detailed. And they had him produce these things for Saddam covertly so the American people wouldn't know. And then they got the zirconium as a key ingredient, which makes the thing work, out of our country. And they faked agricultural reports to get him this stuff, exported it to him, and he sent the things through Africa into Saddam. The other thing they armed him with is the Ames strain of anthrax from Fort Detrick, Maryland. And this is a weaponized grade of anthrax, which has a small protein. It has a small spore size and a altered protein coat, which is weaponized. It makes it more readily absorbable in a human body. So we had covertly armed him with these two things. And so when Saddam got done with the war in Iran, he didn't use all that stuff. And he never got Iran overrun because Secretary of State Donald Rumsfeld at the time, Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld had been giving him satellite intelligence and so forth over there. And so anyway, then fast forward and Saddam invades Kuwait. Well, now he turns from a CIA asset to a liability just like me. And they had to demonize him, and the Saudis were putting a lot of pressure on our government because they're afraid. Our government had to cook up the Desert Storm war, January 91, to get Saddam out of Kuwait. We had a problem. Our standard anthrax shots took a 6-month course, 1 shot per month, to build up autoimmunity to this highly virulent strain. Well, they bypassed all that, and they created a brand new vaccine, which was 1 month with 1 injection. They did that by using an adjunct called squalene. It's a long fatty acid molecule, basically shark oil, and it increases the body's autoimmune response, so the viral stuff will adhere, and you can develop immunity. And so what happened was they started giving all our guys the shots. First lot was Dover Air Force Base, and then I've got all the stuff in the book. It's got all the details and the dates and times and stuff. So all our guys were going over to Iraq getting these shots, and the girls too. So they were all starting to get sick. They bypassed FDA testing. They bypassed it all and were using our troops as guinea pigs without their knowledge. So the second thing they did, that was the first war, the Gulf War, where they used DU, or depleted uranium munitions. They tested them out at the Dugway Proving Grounds and so forth, and the 2 main types of ordnance they were using were the 30-millimeter chain gun DUs and the A-10 Warthog. Those are the jets, the tank busters. And the second thing they used was the Sabot rounds in the M1A1 Abrams tanks, and that's what Timothy McVeigh was in. He was a tank commander and won a Bronze Star over there, and Nichols was his platoon commander. But anyway, these new DU weapons had never been used, and so they had some problems associated with them. They have a real high kinetic energy. It's about 5,200 feet per second, and when they were hitting the T-54 tanks that Saddam had got from the Russians, that was his primary tank. They have 11-ton turrets, and they had a high enough kinetic energy to blow these turrets up like a top in the sky. It made a big fireball, and in this fireball, brand new molecules were being formed. Like I said, just like Agent Orange they used in Vietnam. They didn't know what was going to happen later. And so these new compounds were uranium oxide, uranium dioxide, and they only had a particulate size of 4 microns. Now, our MOP gear, our standard gas mask and NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical gear, only went down to 10 microns. So here, now our troops, on top of getting these nasty vaccines that were causing all kinds of sickness, now they're breathing low-level radioactive particles. And these particles went through the gas mask filters. They were not stopped. And so this stuff started accumulating in our troops. We had approximately 480,000 in theater, and they accumulate in the thyroid and the reproductive glands. And so when our troops were coming home, let's say you're a male, you have all this low-level DU radiation inside of you. And when they came home and they were making love to their spouses, this radiation was being transmitted in their semen into the women, into their ovaries and their reproductive organs. And so when they had children, the children had the radiation in them. And then the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. Pretty soon, the half-life at depleted uranium-238 is about 4.5 million years. The Pentagon had this huge, huge, huge problem, never seen before. Who's going to pay all the medical bills of the children, the great-grandchildren, the great-great? You can see how this could go intergenerationally for generations. And they had a medical culpability problem that could amount to hundreds of billions or even trillions and trillions of dollars in long-term medical costs. So, we're getting to the Murrah Building. With all this background, okay, our soldiers were coming home really sick. They called it Gulf War Syndrome, and that was another cover-up. First, they had to cover up the mop gear being defective. Then they had to cover up depleted uranium. Then they had to cover up the vaccines. So, anyway, all of this stuff was going on, and our guys were getting sicker and sicker. And about 3-4 years later, 1994, this is 1 year before the Murrah Building was blown up, there was a Senator, Chris Shays, Republican from Connecticut, and he was on an Armed Services Committee in Congress, and he was tasked with determining medical culpability to give our guys some money, just like the Agent Orange settlement with Vietnam. And our guys were getting sicker and sicker. The VA had all these strange cases and all this weird stuff. And so he tasked the FBI with gathering all the medical records of 480,000 troops. Now, a lot of them had come back. They were still in the Army. Some of them were civilians. It was a big task for the FBI to gather all these records. And they gave them about a year to do it. And then those records were stored in the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building just before it blew up. So when that building went up, all these records were lost, and they couldn't prove a lot of this stuff and a lot of the sicknesses. And so the Pentagon was off the hook for hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars in long-term intergenerational radiation poisoning, medical costs. And that's one reason. We're going to talk about the second reason here in just a minute. But we know that later on, okay, this is in September 19th of 1996, and I have the part of the congressional records in the appendix of this book. The Department of Defense, the DOD, was at Gulf War Syndrome hearings in front of Congress because these guys just kept getting sicker and sicker, just like Agent Orange in Vietnam. The more time that goes by, the worse this stuff gets. And so the DOD admitted at these hearings that over 400,000 Gulf War Syndrome medical records had, quote, disappeared. Okay? And so that's the first main reason why the Murrah Building was bombed. And then the second one, of course, had to do with the domestic law enforcement records pertaining to the operations I was in over in Mena, Arkansas, where Bill and Hillary Clinton were there. And at that time, they were running these ops there. Reagan had ordered CIA director to covertly arm the Contras. So arms were being sent down there. Barry Seal was one of the pilots. He flew a C-123 transport aircraft. He started something called Rich Mountain Aviation. It was a front for CIA ops to covertly arm, and then they brought drugs back to pay for it. And the height of the op, my higher-ups told me that they were going through approximately $100 million of cocaine a month of the Black Ops money to run cover, use his position as governor to cover it all up. So he was getting about $10 million a month, and that's what he used to run for president. But we were right in the middle of all that, and we can talk about how it was all done and the stuff. It'll take a long time. But that whole op down there, okay, that had been going on for several years. It was a very sloppy op. And at the Mena airport there, they were moving the drugs and the arms. And then we can talk about how they washed the money to the BCCI Bank and the Caymans and all that stuff later. But to make a long story short, there had been domestic law enforcement investigations during that time. I mean, it was a big, huge operation. And the ABI, that's the Arkansas Bureau of Investigation, and the DEA, IRS, they're washing money. they were all doing parallel investigations. And all those records were stored at the Little Rock FBI field office. And so just prior to the Murrah Building blowing up, all those records were magically transferred to the Murrah Building. And so as you recall, by that time, July 26th of 1994, that's when the Whitewater investigation began. And then later in August of 1994, the Ken Starr was appointed as the independent prosecutor.
Yep.
Because Janet Reno had appointed Fitch, and Fitch was just a Clinton flunky, And so anyway, just jump in. I'm talking too fast, but if you want to...
No, please,
I don't want to
continue. This is fascinating stuff, and you just go. This is good.
Okay, well, I can go into a whole lot more detail about all the stuff in Arkansas and the pedophile rings and all that kind of stuff later, but I had some friends that worked on Bill Clinton's wardrobe and stuff before he made his speeches and all this kind of stuff, so we have firsthand knowledge of a lot of this. So anyway, to make a long story short, the Murrah Building bombing, the first reason was all those medical records. Okay, the Pentagon was off the hook for hundreds and hundreds of billions, probably trillions of long-term intergenerational medical costs. So when Clinton had gone up to Washington, they started that Whitewater investigation in 1994. Well, a lot of those records were all stored at the Little Rock field office. And then later on, of course, during the impeachment hearings, that was January 7th through February 12th of 1999. That's when Clinton's impeachment hearings went on. So when the Murrah Building went up in April 19th, 1995, it was very convenient for the Clintons because the Whitewater records, a lot of them were gone. Susan McDougal and James McDougal, they were in that bank in Little Rock in the Whitewater thing, and then James McDougal magically had a heart attack while he was in federal custody just before he was going to go on a book tour about the Clintons and testify to a grand jury. And so there's a whole list in this book of dates, times, names of people that were murdered down there in Arkansas by the Clintons and the CIA to cover these operations up. And so we have a great deal of detail. That's why it's 700 pages. But to make a long story short here, the second reason why they bombed the Murrah Building was because those records were moved over there. Now, there's a Tulsa police detective. His name's Craig Roberts, and he got a call from a federal law enforcement officer who wished to remain anonymous, who told him, hey, they moved the Whitewater, all that stuff's been moved because Congress was going to subpoena all that stuff. Remember, that was July 26th of 94 when Whitewater, so they're starting to subpoena all these records. And then a few months later, in April, then the Murrah Building goes off. And see, in October, that's too much. August, September, October, that's when I was offered the job to bomb that building. So someone from up top knew that the Whitewater investigation was going on. 3 months later, I get the call to go bomb that building. And so the reasons for all this get real clear when you start digging through this and looking at it. That's why I think the Clintons were directly involved in that operation. I think that they are guilty of treason against the United States of America, and I think that they are the worst liars probably of any politicians that we've ever seen. I think they should be punished and put in prison.
If I can interject a question here, did you work with Victor Thorne at all? Do you know who Victor Thorne is?
No, sir.
Okay. Have you worked with?
I did not.
Okay. Have you worked with any of the other authors pertaining to the Mena, Arkansas drug running operation?
Authors by who do you mean?
Or investigative authors. I'm just trying to think of the names. My goodness. Oh.
Well, there was one guy that wrote a book called Terry Reed. He was an Air Force guy.
That's who
Compromise.
Yes, Compromise.
No,
exactly.
I did not. I did not work with him. Barry Seal, he was shot in February 19th of 1986 after the op was over. Now, he was the main pilot. And that same day down in Columbia, they had about 25 to 30 hits done. One of them was Pablo Carrera, the number 2 Medellin cartel guy, and Jorge Ochoa, one of the Ochoa brothers. But later on, Barry Shields' plane, one of the Beechcrafts that he flew, was a King Air 1982-200. It was found on the Crawford Ranch ranch down there with George Bush Jr.
Very interesting.
With same serial numbers and everything, yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, I did not work directly with Terry Reed or any of those guys. My main thing, if you want to talk about that, we can talk about how we moved the arms and all the stuff we did. But back to the original thing about the Murrah Building, the number one reason it was bombed was those Gulf War Syndrome records, and the second one was all these law enforcement files that were very damning to the Clintons. I mean, there was troves of them. The Arkansas Bureau of Investigation, the state police, county prosecutors, FBI, DEA, IRS, they were laundering. How do you launder $100 million a month? Okay. The IRS was involved. There was all kinds of investigations. And then it's all moved to the Murrah Building right during the time when Whitewater and all that's, starting to ramp up.
Okay, if I can just interject a question. Why the Murrah Building? Why not an off-site storage facility where, fires happen all the time? Bad things happen all the time. Why the Murrah Building? Yeah,
well, I don't know the answer to that question. The one guy said, well, why didn't they just destroy the records over there at the FBI Little Rock field office there? And the reason is there's there were multiple agencies, state agencies, federal agencies. You have to have subpoenas and court orders from judges to get even access these records. And so if you were to steal them out of a building or something and then burn them in the backyard or whatever, there'd be a massive investigation and a paper trail. And then there'd have to be witnesses that would either have to be coerced or murdered to cover that up. But it's a lot easier just to get an order from, say, the FBI director to move a bunch of records over somewhere to a building. That way it's just a simple transfer. And then when the building blows up, oh my gosh, it's they're all gone. So they could have done the op in any number of federal buildings, but the one in the Murrah Building, I don't know why they picked that op for that. When they offered me the job to blow that building, I didn't. I thought, I thought the same thing. Why that building? But I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, my only other question, and then I won't interrupt anymore.
No, go ahead, please, because I get sidetracked.
Well, no, I'll sidetrack you like all day long. Why didn't, when you said no to that offer, why didn't the individual who made that offer to you just put a bullet in your head right there? Because how can you? How is it? How can that be kept secret? You're walking away from $500,000 and with knowledge. Foreknowledge of a really bad domestic op, and it would just seem to me that you should be dead.
That's a great.
I mean, given all the subsequent attempts, but why let you go? If I look, I mean, this is just me. If I'm going to be that cold-hearted and say, "Here's $500,000, I want you to blow up a building," and the guy I'm talking to says no, that guy's not going anywhere. That's just me.
Right.
Okay. So why I'm just curious.
Yeah, because they thought I'd be useful on other ops, and here's what happened. This is all in the book. I left it out because of time's sake, but it's all in the book. After Harold Leonard offered me that job, and I told him no, I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm having bad dreams at night. I'm drinking heavily. I used to sleep in a bulletproof vest, and I'd have twin MAC-10 silenced machine guns in .45 caliber, one in each hand. I put tripwires around my house at night. I was getting really paranoid. I'd seen too many people killed, like Barry Sadler down there in Guatemala. And so he offered me another job after that. He said, calm down. If you don't want that job, we got another one for you. And I said, what is it? And he said, it's a little CIA drug op up in Cody, Wyoming, and they're using twin-engine Beechcrafts to move some coke up there. And then they got Mexicans with fake green cards up distributing it, and they're driving it to the big cities like Denver and Salt Lake City, and they're shutting the op down. And standard procedure for the agents or case officers or whoever's doing the op is they pick up and move to the next op or go out of the country, and then lower level people are usually murdered and gotten rid of. That same thing happened in Arkansas when they were shutting down Centaur Road. All the lower level help, just the assets, they're usually, they have accidents and they're suicide and so forth. And that's just one way to maintain operational integrity and minimize future blowback in a black op. And so all that's in the book too. There's names, date, time. So they offered me a job. He said, we had 25 guys to kill. I've already got 2 of them. I need help with the other 23. And he told me what the pay was and everything. And he goes, I'm getting too old for this. I need help. And he said, we can cowboy him. And that's a black op term, which means, you don't even have to try to hide anything, because he said the county sheriff was on the agency's payroll. And so what the sheriff would do would find a body somewhere and then, say I was a suicide. And that happened down in Arkansas because Bill Clinton appointed the state medical examiner in Arkansas. So when the bodies were found down there, the state medical examiner, appointed by Clinton, of course, would rule things as suicide. We have one case in that book. His name's Kevin Ives, and he was at the Mena airport moving drugs. He's a low-level guy. He went to a bar one night and told everyone, he said, man, they're going to kill me. I know too much. And later that night, they found his body on a railroad track out there. And he had supposedly taken a butcher knife and sawed his own head off on the railroad track. And they ruled it death by suicide. Okay?
Right. Now, you go into that story in your book, or no?
Oh, yeah, it's all in there.
All right.
Dates, times. His mother tried to file a suit against the Clintons. She was threatened. I've got so much. There's so much to this. But anyway, back to the reason why you're asking me why they didn't kill me right there. He wanted me to do that other job, and I told him, I said, I can't do this stuff anymore. It was crushing my soul. I just couldn't do it anymore. And on top of that,
that would suck. I'm telling you, that would suck. You talk about bad jobs to have. Okay, that would really be a sucky job. But go ahead.
Oh yeah. So anyway, that's how they do it though in these black ops that are domestic. See, those are illegal ops, but it's not the CIA's fault, like in Arkansas, because Ronald Reagan, the president, ordered the CI director. If he gives a finding to a CI director, that's a green light to assassinate someone. It doesn't matter if it's domestic or foreign. You're not held liable legally. And so they were running an op the president had sanctioned. It was illegal because CI was forbidden to operate domestically in the U.S. at that time. Now, you recall after 2001 in the Twin Towers, they passed that Patriot Act, which is a whole nother, oh my God, don't get me started. But the Patriot Act was passed, and in that act, it allowed the CI to operate domestically for the first time in U.S. history. So anyway, on these ops that they pull, they always have cleanup crews and sanitization crews. That's why Bill and Hillary Clinton have a death list of about 140, 150 people. And all these people fixing to testify to the grand jury, they all ended up, suicides and stuff like that. So anyway, to make a long story short, the reason why he didn't kill me or terminate me there is because they thought they could use me on some future ops. And I knew that was a patsy op for the Murrah Building, because I was going to the end of my operational effectiveness. And 2 days after I turned that job down, one of my CI handlers, his name was Duke Flaglier, he did 2 tours in Vietnam. He was with Barry Sadler, and we can tell all that story. And they'd all trained in 1963. They were in the 20th Special Forces Group they were training before they went to Nam. But he was one of my handlers, and he called me 2 days after I turned the job down to bomb the Murrah Building. He told me, you need to leave the country. I've got a house in Belize, give you the keys, and we'll stage you out of there. And I didn't take his offer up. But so anyway, the reason why they didn't do that is they thought I could be operationally used in some capacity in the future. And also on top of that, I'm a trained black operator. We're trained in assassination, sabotage, and espionage. I'm highly trained. I did martial arts for over 20 years, went to Japan, studied briefly. And Harold Leonard, I'm always heavily armed like that. I had a couple of hand grenades and I think 3 BB pistols on me that time. And I always had my hand, in a coat with my finger on a trigger. In fact, I had a .45 pointed at him through my coat while he was talking to me, because we're always worried about getting set up by our own. It's always the guys you trust the most that sets you up the worst. So he knew better than to try anything with me, because I would have killed him. And if there had been any kind of surveillance or anyone sees a wire of any kind, it's immediate death sentence when you're in the black ops like that. So that's why they didn't kill me.
Very well stated. Thank you for answering that question. My apology. I feel like I have to apologize for even asking that.
No, this is about coming out and speaking the truth. There's some things I will never, ever talk about in public, but the Murrah Building is certainly one of them, because it affects our whole country. It affects the whole shadow government system. And once our people, the American people, there's a lot of good people. We've been misled by this cabal, this shadow government, like the Clintons and all of them.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm sorry.
No, brother, keep going. Just, again, the floor is yours. I don't care how many side roads you take. You just just talk, because we are listening.
Okay, well, we always went by, the creed: admit nothing, deny everything, and make counter accusations. And so one of the things we always did in the Black Ops was make sure there was minimal blowback. There's no FODINT, that's photographic intelligence. There's no HUMINT, that's human intelligence. No SIGINT, that's signal intelligence, like what Edward Snowden and the NSA were dealing with. And ELINT, that's electronic intelligence. So there's also something called PSYINT, that's psychic intelligence. And that's a spinoff from the MK Ultra programs. I was involved in Project Slammer, and we can talk about all that later. That was a CIA covert assassination program dealing with that kind of thing, and directed energy weapons like microwave, stuff like that. That's what I died from back in September 18th and 22nd. Of 1991, and so I can tell you that whole story's in the book. I was the biggest machine gun dealer here in the state of Colorado for several years, and we had Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 manufacturing licenses. Class 2 allows you to build silencers, suppressors, and we participate in some of the Navy SEALs contracts and so forth. All that's in the book. I got pictures, dates, everything's in here. But anyway, getting back to the Murrah Building, that operation was planned ahead of time. The Whitewater hearings had begun in July 26th of 94. The op was ordered sometime after that or during that, because I got the call in October of 94.
Cody, I hate to interrupt you. Yeah. We're at the top of the hour break. This is the only break, and then you got a full hour on the other side. Folks, we're going to be right back with Cody Snodgress. His book, Choosing the Light. In fact, go to, where is it here?
Yeah, we got a PDF link that they can get it if they need it. Okay,
lightonconspiracies.com/Cody. The link is in the description box. That's the book to get. This is a guy to listen to. We're going to be right back. 3-minute network break. Stay where you're at. Cody Snodgress is with us, going to stay with us this hour. His book, Choosing the Light, Dark Secrets of the Oklahoma City Bombing, and much more, of course. And his website is the book is available on lightonconspiracies.com. That's lightonconspiracies.com/Cody. The link is in the description box for the show tonight. This is amazing, important information. This is a guy, and you could tell the stories his story is weighing heavy on his heart, and this is fantastic. Arkansas politics, Dixie Mafia, Mena, Arkansas, Bush, Clinton, the Gulf War, Manuel Noriega, all of this is all connected, whether you want to believe it or not. And Cody's got the goods. He's got the documentation in his book, and it's Choosing the Light, Dark Secrets of the Oklahoma City Bombing. And I guarantee you that the first thing I'm going to do, one of the first things I'm going to do is order his book.
You're trying to do it during the break.
Yeah, actually I was. But having said that, welcome back, Cody, and thank you so much for agreeing to stay the extra unplanned hour. And again, you've got the floor, no interruptions. It's up to you, my brother. Go ahead.
Well, Thank you, sir, and I'd like to thank everyone out there. We're going to cover some stuff that may be kind of shocking. And what I'd like to do right now is go back to the Waco compound, because ATF agent Blake Butler was there, and we have video evidence of him. When you recall when that happened, that was back, this is all detailed in the book, February 28th, 93, that's when the Waco fiasco broke off, where 4 ATF agents were shot and 6 branch civilians were killed. And what we're going to do is tell you from an eyewitness, okay, and about Timothy McVeigh's involvement down there, which most people, there's a lot of this stuff's never been made public, except by me. And then we're going to crisscross the Waco into Manuel Noriega and the Panamanian Embassy. So this is stuff that most civilians never, ever hear. I was in Panama City, and so we're going to go through this real quick. So when that broke out, February 28th, 93, of course it made the news real quick, but I knew a guy named Ron Cole. He was a Branch Davidian. I'm not, but he was. And he was one of McVeigh's best friends, David Koresh. He was David Koresh's best friend, the head of the Branch Davidians. And so just before that compound was hit by the ATF, his mother got sick in Florida, so Ron flew down there. And this is direct eyewitness testimony that he told me. He flew to take care of his mother, and then the very next day, the Waco compound got hit. And he called when it first broke on the news that there was some kind of gunfight going on, and he called David Koresh before the feds cut the phone line. And by that time, Koresh had been shot. And he asked him what's going on. And this is what Ron Cole told me that Koresh told him, because it's very different from what the ATF cover story and the federal cover story was. Koresh told him that they were sitting around in the Branch Davidian compound one day, and then trucks pulled up, and they had these big cattle trailers behind them, and the Branch Davidian dogs at the compound ran out to them, and the people in there shot the dogs and then opened up on the compound, and it was the ATF. And so Koresh had been shot, and Ron was talking to him, and then they cut the phone line. So Ron left his mother, found someone to take care of her. He came back, flew back, and by that time, the feds had set up a big perimeter around the compound. And there was a lot of Branch Davidians that were not in the compound when it was surrounded, but they were instead, shopping and doing things in town and stuff. So what they all did was they gathered around the perimeter and they set up camps. And they were sitting there watching what was going on at night. And they were sitting around there, and they had telescopes, binoculars, so forth. What they saw, according to Ron, was at night there were these black helicopters. There were no lights, no markings, and they were circling the Branch Davidian compound. Well, they were seeing these lights come down from them. These are all civilians. They didn't know what they were seeing. It was orange and green and red streaks. And they go, "What is that? What's going on? I wish we had some night vision." And someone came up out of the darkness and said, "I've got some military night vision." And he said, "Those are machine gun tracers." And they looked through the thing and they could see it all. And they said, "How do you know about all this?" He said, "I just got back from Desert Storm. I was a tank commander over there, and it was Timothy McVeigh." So McVeigh handed my friend Ron the night vision, and he said, "Well, why are they doing it? Why are they shooting that compound up?" McVeigh says, "That's standard military practice, like Delta Force tactics. What you do is when you have insurgents in a domestic structure and you're surrounding them, what you do is you deny the high ground to the snipers, and you push them down to the lower levels. That way you can collapse the perimeter closer." You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so they were machine gunning. It's called suppressing fire, and they suppress. All the operatives have to go down low to get away from the fire, and so they can't shoot as far. They can shoot a lot further on the top of the roof. But when they're down on the lower floors, you can collapse the perimeter. So that was standard practice. So what they were doing was murdering the Branch Davidians night after night, just machine gunning that place all up. And then later on, as you recall, after the so-called standoff, that was ended on April 19th of 1993. That's, by the way, the same date, April 19th, that the Murrah Building 2 years later would blow up.
And the alleged reason for the Murrah Building, right?
Right. Well, we're going to get there in just a second. The Waco thing ended then, and there were 54 dead and about 21 children dead. When they saw all that, that's one reason McVeigh got mad when he saw all that. Now, Ron Cole and them later, there's a whole big long story in this book, what happened with the remaining Branch Davidians that were outside because the feds got tanks off of the Fort Hood. That's where my dad took his basic training before he went over to Pacific Command at Pearl Harbor and all that. That story's in the book, too. He was at Guadalcanal, Pearl Harbor. But on Fort Hood, the ATF lied to Governor Ann Richardson so they could get a hold of those tanks because that was a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. But they lied to her and got the tanks, and then they used those tanks to burn the compound down. And so that covered up all their murders from the helicopters. And then Ron Cole and them, when they saw what was really going on, him and some of the Branch Davidians all left, and they came up here to Colorado. And I'd been the biggest machine gun dealer in the state for quite a while. And he acquired some illegal MP5 machine guns to protect them and the remaining Branch Davidians. Now, they didn't get them from me. I didn't have anything to do with them, although ATF agent Doug Miller, he was our compliance officer out of the Denver branch. When the Branch Davidian compound went up, they came to my machine gun shop and wanted to go through my ordnance and all of my records to see if I had shipped anything to the Branch Davidians. I had one of my gun distributors, RSR, down in Dallas, so I had no contact with the Branch Davidians. So Ron Cole and them came up here and they rented a little place out in the country trying to hide. The feds hit them at night in black, all black, and murdered some more of them. And then Ron Cole went up to Canada, and he had a fake Algerian passport and was going to leave the country, and he made one mistake. He called his girlfriend down in Waco on a cell phone, and then the next morning, the RCMP, that's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the feds arrested him and extradited him, and they threw him in the pod with me when I was down there with McVeigh. And Ron Cole told me the story straight to my face. He said that's what really happened at Waco, and nobody knows it. The feds not only shot them all up and then burned the compound down to, cover it all up, they rigged the trial down there, and then they sent sweep teams around to kill the remaining Branch Davidians so there wouldn't be any witnesses. And, anyone to talk about the op. I'm one of the only people you'll ever hear this from because it's all been cleaned up, okay? So now we're going to go to the Panamanian Embassy in Manuel Noriega down there. As you recall, Noriega, he was also a CIA-paid asset, just like Saddam Hussein was over in
I can
Iraq.
verify that. I can verify that. That I know.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so when he was holed up in the embassy there, and they were trying to get him out. Now, this is something real important. No one's ever heard this, so I'm going to try to go slow. It's very important. Noriega's in the embassy holed up. Well, they had brought some special teams, and these teams deal with psychotronic weaponry. Psychotronic, that means psychological manipulation of human beings by electronic means. That means directed sound waves, ELF, UHF, electromagnetic frequencies, microwaves, modulated microwaves, X-rays, and so forth. These are devices that send directed energy to a target to affect a change. And so at the embassy down there in Panama, they had brought some of these devices. They're generally mounted on Jeeps or Humvees or something like that. They have a dome-shaped antenna and a power source. And what they did was they bombed the embassy there with sound waves to make Noriega come out. And they wanted to make sure they captured him and he didn't escape because he knew way too much about the dope and the bushes and all the stuff that was going through the Panama Canal down there. That's a whole other story. But anyway, so Noriega was in there and they're hitting him with psychotronics. And they were playing songs. One of the songs they played was Nancy Sinatra, These Boots Are Made for Walking. Now, this is real interesting, because what happens when you use an audio, a sound wave weapon, most of the sound is outside the audible range of the human ear, like when you blow a dog whistle, the dogs hear it, but we don't. But sometimes the frequencies that they're using to make people want to surrender and get tired and feel sick, they get into the human range of hearing. And so they have what they call audio overlays. So they play a song or something, and the frequencies are matched to cover up the underlying psychotronic signal. Okay, you with me?
100%.
All right. So they played These Boots Are Made for Walking over and over and over down there in Panama. And most of the troops, everybody walking around, they didn't know what was going on. Well, guess what song they played over and over and over at the Branch Davidian compound at night?
Come on, Nancy. Right?
These boots are made for walking. And they used the same psychotronic stuff to bomb the Branch Davidians to make them want to surrender and come out, as they did down to Noriega at the Panamanian Embassy. And I didn't put all this together until Ron Cole told me to my face. He said, we thought it was weird when we were sharing that night vision with McVeigh, and we were watching all of those choppers go around and machine gun those poor people all straight to hell. He said that we kept hearing that song over and over, night after night. They kept just playing it over and over, and all the guys were going, God, we're sick of hearing that. Why are they doing that? Well, none of them had been down in Panama like me, and I'd heard that. I didn't hear it at the Branch Davidian compound because I wasn't there, but I talked to an eyewitness. Then I put it together. They were using psychotronic weaponry. And if you look at the Boston bombing thing, when they kicked in all the doors around Boston, you'll see some of those pictures of those things. They're going down the street and they have those dome-shaped, kind of black dome weapon things. Those are sound waves. Those are psychotronic weapons.
We saw those in Pittsburgh, by the way.
Oh.
Okay. They brought those in for the protests in Pittsburgh. When was that, Joe? It was
2009, I believe, at the G20.
Yeah. So we've seen those. I don't know what you call them. The weapons.
Sound weapons using high-pitched frequencies.
Yeah, right.
Okay, now in the book here, I also have another story, it's never been told public, dealing with SDI weapons, Star Wars Defense Initiative weapons. These were laser beams that were used down in Nicaragua. This is an amazing story. One of the guys I knew was a Army Ranger, but CIA had pulled him out of his MOS there to use him on covert ops in Nicaragua. And what the standard procedure was to pull him out for, say, 2 or 3 weeks, and then they would fake his DOD files and have a fake, what we call a legend. They would put him at a place and a time like the Ramstein base in Germany, blah, 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 and they give him a medal and say he was doing all this stuff. The whole thing was a fake in the DOD records for the Army Rangers while he was doing black ops for the agency. And the whole story's in there about them eyewitnessing those types of weapons. Now, if you fast forward today, they're using them in California, pure and simple, for the fire. It's pure and simple.
Joe and I were talking about that earlier, John Robertson and I as well. To what end, though?
Yeah,
why? Why?
Well, Agenda 21, basically, the UN has that thing. The first fire that started out there was basically right around the same zones that Agenda 21 had been set up for the new housing. I was born in Santa Monica, California. I've got a lot of friends and stuff out there been calling me. But they have handheld cell phone footage where they were filming big fires, standing in the street going, wow, look at this. And then you could see those the bluish-white beams come down real quick. It's like lightning.
Wow.
And I think they had ground teams starting the fires, and that was the cover for these weapons. Now, in the book, I have this whole story about Nicaragua and the Black Ops teams down there and how they were testing these things. And it's an
And you were there. Just to be clear, you were there in Nicaragua.
Oh yeah, I've been all through Central America, South America, Peru, Colombia, all that down there.
Right.
Like I said, my girlfriend had dinner with Pablo Escobar himself, so I know so many things.
Yeah, I had to break a day with Pablo. I scheduled to have a brunch with him, and I just told him I couldn't. I was busy that day. No, I jest. A little levity never hurts, but so you I mean, just
I
go
can tell
ahead.
you the story down there in Nicaragua about the SDI weapons, or I can tell you about her with Pablo and what all happened with that. She had to shoot a guy one night, and that's how she met him. But I've got so many stories.
Wait a second. You can't just gloss over that. Wait a minute. She had to shoot a guy one night, and that's how she met who? Pablo?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
She was working as a cocktail waitress at a club down in Miami, and the dealer was one of the lower level dealers for the Escobars, and she was selling about 7 kilos of cocaine a week, and she was just a little piss ass dealer for him. And then her boss took her out on a big jet boat one night and showed her a whole load of cocaine that was on it, and then he tried to rape her, and so she shot him.
All right.
And then she drove the boat back, and she knew she was in over her head, and she went to her boss's bosses and told them, look, I had to shoot your guy. It's nothing personal, but I don't want to get caught up in stealing a whole boatload of coke. So I brought the boat back, like and our boss is here in town.
Yeah.
And so he wants to meet you. So she went and met him, and then
was she agency
at dinner.
Is she agency or not?
No,
Okay.
no. She was independent. She's just independent,
Right.
but she's real pretty, and so anyway, she told me that Pablo had a bag of diamonds, and he pulled them out at dinner, and he says, "You've brought back millions of dollars of coke, and we want to offer you a job, and we're glad that you shot that guy because he shouldn't have been mixing business with pleasure. That's a no-no when you're operational, but some people do it and they lose their lives for it. But these guys don't have time to mess around with a bunch of stupid stuff. But so he had the diamonds, and there were big ones and little ones. And she picked one in the middle. He said, "You passed the test." And she said, "What are you talking about? I thought you were giving me this diamond." He goes, "No, this whole thing's a test. I don't give a shit about the diamonds. If people pick a big diamond, that means they're greedy, and we're going to have to kill them later. If they pick a little diamond, that means they're cowards and they're too timid, and then we're going to have to kill them later because they'll turn snitch." So that was his test on people moving up the ladder. And so she went off and left a house and a boat and a bunch of stuff down there and just said, "Look, I don't want to get this deep in this business. I was, just dealing 7 keys a week. That's like 15 pounds of coke a week. That's nothing for that situation down there." She goes, "That's all I want. I don't want to get any deeper." Because she just shot a guy, and so she left. But yeah, there's all kinds of stories like that in this book, and generally we don't have time to go through all of them. But
very interesting, and thanks for doing that. Thanks for
well, sure.
So go ahead and continue as again. We've got the next 40 some minutes left, so it's 38 minutes left. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I can tell a little bit about those SDI weapons. Here's what happened. This guy, I'm not going to use his name, but he was an Army Ranger, and the agency came and got him and said, "We need to take you down there and do some ops." So he was on a black ops team in Nicaragua. This is when Ortega was the president. The communists were fighting the Contras, and all these arms were coming in there, and the dope was coming back, so forth. Soviets were operating all over the area, bringing in all kinds of arms and stuff. They were in the dope business too, just like the CIA was. And so, anyway, their Black Ops team was out in the jungle, and they came up on a village. This is his story. He told me directly to my face. They were on a village, and they came into the village, and there's about 100 people, men, women, children, all dead, everybody dead. Cooking pot still going, fire still going, all the people dead, but the animals alive. Goats, chickens, pigs, monkeys in the trees, and birds, everything alive. So they immediately put on their NBC gear. That's nuclear, biological, chemical, because as you recall, the Soviets were using that blue rain, that chemical stuff over there in Afghanistan when they were fighting the Mujahideen.
Yep.
I had some friends that were arming them with Stinger missiles and, metric tons of hash and all the crap. That's a whole other story. anyway, back to Nicaragua. These guys saw all this stuff, and it's like they freaked them out. They thought the Soviets had dumped some kind of weird nerve agent that killed the people, not the animals. So they set up camp that night, set a perimeter, and they radioed the stuff in. They had an encrypted sat link, which went back to CI station down there, station chief. And at night, my buddy told me, he says, we seen all these bluish-white beams, and they were coming down. And when we got to the village, there was this, like a grayish ash that was in the tree cam, and they never seen nothing like that. All these guys were seasoned combat vets. They didn't know what these lights were. They'd never seen them. So the next morning after they called it in, CI station chief himself came out there in a Huey 204. They were using those back then instead of the Blackhawks like they got now. But he came out in the 204, and he confiscated his own Black Ops team's cameras and film and said, you guys were never here, and you never saw this. And they said, well, your orders, sir. And he said, stay here one more day, conceal, the perimeter, set a perimeter, and then leave. Well, my buddy and them saw that stuff again that night, and they had a puff plane backup off one of that air base over in El Salvador, and a puff plane, C-130 or C-123 with the miniguns on the side, usually 308s. And that's a standard deal in a jungle where you got tree canopy, and if you have to call in close air support, if they got in a ground fight there, then they would just come hose the whole place down, And that was their backup. So they called them and they asked them, is there any air traffic in the area? Is there any Air Force stuff? What's going on? We're seeing strange things in the sky. And they said, there's no reported traffic. So they left, and years go by, and my buddy's back up here in the States. He's in Colorado Springs. And one of his old op buddies comes back in, and he says, what have you been doing? He says, I'm bored shitless. I'm going to write a book. This civilian life is boring. And he says, you better not write a book. That's heavy stuff we were in. Well, the next day, 2 FBI agents showed up at my buddy's house, and they arrested him. And they threw him in that pod up there with us, and that's where he told me this story. And I said, what do you think those lights were? And he says, we've never seen anything like it. He said, I think it was satellite stuff, or it was way high up, jets using those laser things that Reagan was doing that Star Wars defense initiative. And what he described to me is the exact same thing I saw in the videos from California, starting the fires.
Wow.
They were testing that stuff back in the 80s.
Okay, that makes sense.
And and
I've seen a lot of strange stuff because I flew the Space Shuttle simulator at NASA. It's the one the astronauts trained on when I was working on my Master of Science degree in physics down there. We got a behind-the-scenes tour with clearance. So I've seen a lot of strange lasers and strange things, and this all makes perfect sense when you look at it. But now we're going to we did Noriega, we did Nicaragua with the beams and the SDI and the psychotronic weapons, and then the psychotronic use of covertly weapons there at the Branch Davidian compound. And so we're going to get back to McVeigh, because McVeigh had the night vision and saw what they were doing, machine gunning up the Branch Davidians illegally, pre-trial. And he had just got back from Desert Storm. Now, a lot of people don't know this. When he was getting his anthrax shots, like we talked about before, and his standard course of injections to go over there to Iraq, he was part of a covert test. And it was a Lockheed Martin satellite test for the Beast. It's called Battle Engagement Area Simulator Tracker. That's what BEAST stands for. Now, what this was, in the old days, they had dog tags for soldiers, and when there was an explosion, there would be an arm here, leg there, torso there. They had a hard time putting all the parts together, so they went to little microchips in the dog tags, and then finally, they were using the field configuration in Iraq as a real-life test. And so they gave McVeigh an implantable microchip in his buttocks on the right side there, and did not tell him. What they did was they picked out certain soldiers in different groups and gave them these little chips using the cover of their injections without their knowledge. And the protein codes on these chips were poor back then in the early 90s. They were testing them, and they resulted generally in a degradation and breakdown and autoimmune response in the body. And that's exactly what happened to McVeigh. After he got this shot he didn't know about, when he got back, he started having red sores and stuff on his rear, and he had to have that thing removed, and he got really pissed off that the Army had secretly done that. And Lockheed Martin had satellites, and the satellites were tasked over the Iraq War during the January 91 conflict, and it was a real-time test with smoke, oil well fires, oil plumes, sand, wind, all the things going on in a real battle where they could monitor individual soldiers through the RFID tracking chips. That way, if a soldier was blown up with some Soviet ordnance like Saddam was using, or those Scud missiles that they were using at the time, generally the torso would remain, and maybe the arms and legs would be spread out, but they'd find the body by the chip. It was a new way. They were trying to sell it to the Army as a new way to take care of wounded and find soldiers after battles and stuff. So that was being tested, and he found out about it, got really pissed off. He had it removed. Now, we know this because he wrote letters to his sister Jennifer, and I have copies of those letters in this book in the appendix. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but when Jennifer McVeigh, well, that's not her name, but they were sister and brother, when Jennifer was subpoenaed to the 10th Circuit Federal Court up here under Judge Richard Mage during the McVeigh trial, she was subpoenaed to testify, but the FBI had previously went in and kicked her door in and taken a lot of these letters and things because they didn't want all this stuff showing up when the Oklahoma City bombing trial came. So McVeigh wrote...
Real quick question, because Joe and I were at, but did not speak with McVeigh's father in Lockport, New York. She was living in upstate New York at the time, right?
Who, Jennifer?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where she.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure where she was.
Because
but McVeigh was in upstate New York, around Buffalo, New York, right, when he worked for Calspan. Yeah.
Right, and there was a. I'm going to tell you right now, there was a lot of talk. Joe and I were up there. A lot of talk about his activities, and but go ahead. It's interesting crossroads that you and I have.
Okay. Let's get back to that circle right here in just a second. But for this thing right here, I'm getting to the real critical part. First, he'd seen with night vision what really happened at Waco. That kind of pissed him off. Secondly, he'd been implanted with this test microchip that they didn't tell him about. That pissed him off. The third thing that did it was when McVeigh got back from Desert Storm, where he'd been a tank commander, won a Bronze Star, confirmed kills. It's all in the DOD records. He applied for Special Forces, and there was over 100 guys in the class. Well, due to the psych profiles and tests they gave him, CIA covertly approached him and 10 other guys, and they wanted him to bomb buildings, assassinate people, and while using his front as Special Forces. In other words, CIA wanted him to continue graduate from Special Forces. His whole MO would be Special Forces, but he'd really be doing jobs for the CIA, just like my buddy in the Army Rangers when they pulled him out for the CIA. So this is a standard thing. And so, I had a civilian front as being, geophysicist, and that was a good civilian front. But this was going to be used in the Army as a front. And so McVeigh told him no, and that's when he left and he quit the Army. He went up to Calspan in Buffalo and was a security guard up there. And that's where we think he probably, after being placed in the standard CIA program of alienation and isolation, that's where they take a combat vet or somebody that saw a lot of action and he's bored to death at some job, and then they approach him and say, hey, you need a job, you need something. Then you get a little excitement, and you make a heck of a lot more money than you do as a security guard. But Calspan up there, that place, they were in the Redstone program with the Air Force. That was an electronic ECM, electronic countermeasure thing. They had microchips, a lot of telemetry systems, waveguide antennas, and all kinds of real high-powered stuff, and it may happen to be there. Then he shows back up later, in the Ryder truck at the Murrah Building as the Patsy. There were 2 bombs down there that did not explode. There were 3 of them pre-wired, and they did that exactly how I would have done that building. I would have had a cover, because that building, when you blow it up, it's a civilian building in a country with a lot of infrastructure like America, and you have a lot of civilian newscasts and cameras everywhere. That building went up. It had 168 people were killed, 680 injured. I mean, it destroyed 86 cars, 324 buildings were damaged over 16-block radius, $652 million in damage, and shattered glass in 258 buildings. So that was a big deal. And how are you going to cover that up? How are you going to do a black op and bomb something like that to get rid of the Gulf War Syndrome records and the Clinton Whitewater records and all of that Arkansas CIA stuff over there? How are you going to do that without a cover? And they did that exactly how I would have done. I would have had a civilian cover or an Army ex-military cutout like McVeigh and have the Ryder truck pull up. Then you have 3 bombs simultaneously wired already sitting there. And then you detonate them more or less simultaneously. And the whole thing goes up, and then you lay it off on Apache. That way, they think the Ryder truck did it, and no one knew about the 3 bombs. But the 2 of them didn't go off, so they had another problem. And then later on, there were eyewitnesses that saw guys moving file cabinets and stuff out of there. They pulled the perimeter back. Gosh, there's so much here. There's so much here. We have names, dates, times. It just goes on and on.
I think that this is a good time to tell people that what you're leaving out when you're not talking about is contained in your book. And I'm correct on that, which I would urge everyone to get, of course. And it's up there on our screen if you're looking at our screen right now. Choosing the Light, and the author, of course, that we're speaking with right now, Cody Snodgress. Okay, so again, go anywhere, everywhere, wherever you want. I mean, it's you're doing well, my friend, and I'm glad we had this extra time together because this is a story that should be told over days.
This thing it's like a onion, and you peel off one layer, and then there's another one, and then you peel that one off. You start looking, and the more you peel, the more there are, until you get some key pieces of intelligence. And then the puzzle just starts falling together. And so that's what I was trying to do writing this book, was provide my own personal input, the things I saw eyewitness myself or lived through, and or people like Ron Cole that, were one step away. And so we try to work off of actionable intelligence. People go, what does that mean? Well, actionable intelligence is something that you would take an action on. It's an intelligence that has a level of correctness where you would take action, and action means that you risk your life on.
As opposed to
ideally, you want to have intelligence that's 100% accurate, but you never have that out in the field. We were on ops where you get some intel on it, and then you go into the actual thing in the field, and the intel we got was just pure crap. And then you walk into a meat grinder. And then when you do that and your intel's bad, then you have blowback and you have to cover more stuff up, and it just turns into a big CF, And so anyway, okay. So McVeigh, he had reasons why he didn't like the government anymore. One, he'd seen them murdering our own civilians down there. Two, he'd been given a microchip that he didn't like in some covert test for Lockheed Martin, like a guinea pig. Then he got those weird anthrax vaccines, and it was making a lot of people sick. And then three, he had a lot of reasons why he didn't like the government, but that's probably the reason why he took that job, to drive the Ryder truck. And there's no way that ammonium nitrate and diesel could affect that kind of damage. There's no way that could take down that building. The structural integrity of the I-beams and the stuff in the center is just like World Trade Center 7. Those beams are too big. You cannot break them without nano thermite or C4. C4 plastic explosive has a detonation rate of approximately 26,000 feet per second. And you generally use the M7 DuPont electric blasting caps. They take about a 3.2 volt charge to set them off. And that's how I would have done that building, was I would have wired the structure ahead of time using the civilian front of a phone company or phone crew, and you go in there and you plan them, then you have to conceal them. But you have to do it pretty quick, because if you take electric blasting caps and you don't shun them in a civilian setting like that where there's a lot of RF signal or radio frequency signal, secondary charges and go off. So what you'd have to do is keep those charges shunted until right before the patsy was going to pull up. And what you generally have is another team down the street, like in the OG&E building, the Oklahoma Gas Electric building, or one of the other buildings that was observing. And then when the patsy shows up in the truck and it gets out of the truck, because they had timers and they knew how long the timers were, McVeigh set those timers. And he's a getaway car. He had it parked around the corner. Then when that happens and he sets those timers, then you wait till right at the last second and detonate the ones in the building. And 2 of those charges didn't go off, and I think the blasting caps failed, or the charges that they were shunted and they didn't work at all. But do you understand what I mean when I'm talking about shunting from RF signal?
Exactly. You don't want to. You don't want a premature explosion.
Yeah, because somebody can be driving by on a cell phone, or one of those weird radio stations can have something come out of their tower, and if there's a secondary current produced in those wires and they're not shunted, the caps will blow off.
Right, and that's why we store our caps in a very special manner here. I'm joking, but okay. I have to ask you this question before it gets too far on. Was McVeigh the only one in that truck?
All right, I'm going to tell you something that has never been out in public before. The night before the Murrah building blew up, okay, this is the 18th of April, 1995. Now remember, Kerry James Gagan had told me that 3 days before the Murrah build-up, he took explosives down to 3 Middle Eastern men, okay? And those 3 Middle Eastern men took those explosives from him. There was a whole van load of them, of C4. Just like I said, that's what you'd use. That's the only thing strong enough to cut the beam. The other explosives, they use composition B and ammonium nitrate. There's no way that'll take down a building. So C4 has that real sharp crack. So these 3 guys took that van load of explosives down from Gagan. They had the plans for the Murrah building. All right, now, the night before the Murrah building blew up, this is the 19th of April, 95, McVeigh and 2 guys of Middle Eastern descent showed up in Tulsa, Oklahoma on 21st and Sheridan at the Lady Godiva's Titty Bar, or the strip club. Now, the reason I know this is because one of my Cherokee medicine women, I'm part Cherokee and part white in Oklahoma, her daughter, Shannon, her name is Norma Freedom and her daughter's name Shannon. Shannon was a dancer at that club. And when McVeigh and those 2 Middle Eastern guys came in the club in Tulsa the night before the Murrah building was bombed, she sat with them at the table. And she said one of the guys, the Middle Eastern guys, was really drunk. And he was blowing his mouth off and talking crazy stuff like, I will be real important. You'll see tomorrow, and all this kind of stuff. Well, Shannon got spooked, and she left. So some other girls came and sat with them the rest of the night. Well, they didn't think much about it until when the Murrah building went off, and they started putting out those John Doe number 1 and John Doe number 2. Then later on, they started blasting McVeigh's picture all over the screen. Shannon saw it. She freaked out. She goes, that's a guy that was here in the club. Well, that didn't fit with the federal cover story. And then the girl that was sitting with McVeigh and these 2 Middle Eastern guys, after Shannon left, they found her dead in her apartment, murdered, the next day, which was the same exact day, the Murrah building. I got all the dates and everything in the book, the apartment name, everywhere. And so I've got another eyewitness that I've known Shannon since she was little, and she told me straight to my face. I said, don't bullshit me. I said, are you sure that's me? She goes, I was sitting right beside him. I didn't know who he was until I saw his face on the deal. So the whole federal cover story about where McVeigh was and the Ryder truck and all that, that's all BS. But she didn't want to talk. I asked her, can I get a tape recording? And she said, I don't want to get involved. I don't want anything to do with it. And because her friend just got murdered the very next day, after she sat with those two guys in Middle Eastern descent, she was murdered the next day in her apartment. So then the bouncer said that the FBI came in there after the bombing and confiscated all the surveillance tapes out of the bar because it could have shown McVeigh with two Middle Eastern men. So to answer your question...
Yeah, I've got confirmation on what you just said. Go ahead to answer the question. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. To answer your question, when McVeigh pulled up in that Ryder truck, now I was not there that day. Remember, as soon... I didn't know anything was going on. I mean, I had turned the job down, and I didn't want anything to do with it, and I didn't get spooked. I went black up here on April 19th. When I heard it on the news, I went black. I got fake IDs and passports and drop cars and all the standard trade craft stuff, and I left out of here, and I went down to Oklahoma. But when I heard those stories about the Middle Eastern man getting out, I believe him. I don't think he was alone. I don't think you could set the timers operationally. Generally, when you're driving a bombing truck like that, you have a guy that watches. You have a watcher. Your job is to drive, and the other guy's job is to watch for, parallel teams or any kind of potential blowback or anything like that. So I'm convinced there was another guy with him, and there were several people who did say they saw that. But I'm just telling you what I know firsthand from Shannon and firsthand from the things that I would have done had I taken that job to bomb that building. Okay. I'm a patriot, and I'll never turn on my country, never.
I believe that. And just by virtue of what you're saying, I think anyone would believe that. I just have to ask this question. Hussein al-Husseini. Ring a bell?
I've heard the name, but I do not have any actionable intelligence on it. I have heard that name, though, bandied around, but I don't know. I don't have any knowledge about that.
Based on the information I have, and I would share this with you in a heartbeat. Hussein al-Husseini was the second person in the Ryder truck. And, okay. And Hussein al-Husseini had moved from that contingent of Middle Eastern. He was Iraqi Special Forces, Republican Guard. He moved there to Braintree, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. And that's where I met, Joe and I met Hussein al-Husseini and the transplants from Oklahoma City, and looked in their eyes, and let me tell you something, they're, no soul.
Did you see that dark, deep, it's like looking into the eye of a dead fish laying on the boat dock?
Yeah, I mean, there's not, yeah. And after looking at that, there's not enough hot showers you can take to get rid of that, yeah, it's just rough. But, okay, and again, I don't want to take your time up, so continue, sir.
No, yeah, I didn't know that. See, and that's what's good about us all talking like this. I've got a little piece of my puzzle. I by no means know everything. You just told me something I didn't know. You go to Dave Hodges' show or John B. on Caravan to Midnight or any of these other places, and someone always comes up and goes, "Oh, well, I know this." Or I had Craig Roberts, that Tulsa police detective. I used to live in Tulsa there, and he just contacted me here and was telling me stuff that I never knew before, because he had investigative notes when he left the Tulsa Police Department after the Oklahoma City bombing went off. He went down there and investigated. He was there, for the Tulsa Police Department. And later on, the FBI wanted his files and then told him to shred them. And he wouldn't do it because he knew a massive cover-up was going on. And so this stuff just goes on and on. One other thing we might cover is on the day of the bombing, April 19, 1995, approximately 9:03 a.m. Central Time, when that went off, there was a Oklahoma City police officer on Northwest 5th Street down there near the Murrah Building. His name was Terry Yeakey, and if I'm saying it, Yeakey, maybe.
Yeakey,
he'd been, he'd been an MP in the military, and then he was an Oklahoma City police officer, and he was down there in his patrol car. I think he was given a ticket or something, and then the bomb went off, and he was one of the first responders, went running down there, and he saved several people that had been cut with glass and were bleeding profusely. And he got the Oklahoma City Police Department's Valor duck, and all that. And he went in the daycare center to look for children, and that's where he eyewitnessed the unexploded bomb. And so what a standard op like this, if you're going to destroy records, that's one thing, but another thing you want to do is create a bunch of panic and fear. And a lot of people don't know this, but Bill Clinton, when he first got in office in 92, I think it was, he had started this thing. It was the Anti-Effective Death Penalty and Anti-Terrorism Act, and he couldn't for it in Congress. But right after the Murrah Building went up in 95, suddenly he got the votes, and this thing just tore up our Constitution, Bill of Rights. It was like the Patriot Act after 9/11. It was really horrible. So that's another reason, is to cause fear and get a vote in Congress, cause fear to the population, get gun control, and so forth. And so this whole thing with Yiki was he had eyewitnessed this stuff, and they wanted to cause a psyop. You put a bomb in a daycare. I realize sounds pretty horrible, but from their viewpoint, you put a bomb in a daycare and you have more children casualties. That's what you want in an op like that. You want a lot of dead babies so that you can pull on the heartstrings of America. You can put it all over the news. And as you recall, that's just what they did with the press. You remember that Newsweek, I think it was Time or Newsweek, had that firefighter carrying the mangled baby out. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And they blasted that all over the news and all this stuff. That was to get the civilian population all mad and angry and fearful and so forth. But that bomb didn't explode, and the other one didn't explode. And so Yiki started his own investigation, and he had lots of files. The Oklahoma City Police Department tried to hush him up, and he wouldn't play ball, so they threatened him. And come to find out later that the reason why the Oklahoma City Police Department was involved in the cover-up of the Murrah Building bombing was because the FBI had infiltrated the Oklahoma City Police Department and had caught several of their cops dealing dope. Not all the cops were dirty, but some of them inside the Oklahoma City Police Department were dealing dope, and the feds had got them on tape and stuff, so they threatened and blackmailed the Oklahoma City Police Department that if you don't play ball with us and help us cover all this stuff up, then we're going to expose you and prosecute a bunch of you. So they played ball. Terry didn't play, and he went off on his red Mustang one day. He was afraid they were going to do something to him, and he went to hide the files. And they had another copy his wife, Tanya, had made, and they put him in a bank safety deposit box. Then there was another guy named Chumley, Dr. John Chumley, and he had a copy of the files, and Chumley flew his single-engine plane that day to take the files out. They were nervous, and then Chumley's plane crashed, and then on the same exact day that Chumley's plane crashed, Terry Yiki was found dead, the Oklahoma City police officer, and his trunk was open, all those files were gone.
Yeah,
I'm
aware of that.
Yeah, you know all that stuff.
Yep, and that is, and what you said about the FBI infiltrating Oklahoma City Police Department, I would just, I would contend perhaps we're seeing a similar case with Vegas, but obviously the circumstances are different, but nonetheless.
Right. See, that's the neat part about this is there's parallels. When you know from the inside about these shadow government black ops and false flag ops, the same pattern starts showing up. Kennedy assassination, Oswald, the lone killer, the bombing of the Murrah Building, the 9/11 towers. You start seeing that there's this unseen hand, and there's a similar pattern to an operation and then the cover-up, which follows the operation. And when you start studying them, our country has been taken over. I'm a firm believer. I was in Dallas the day Kennedy was shot, November 22nd, 1963. I was a second grader. I can tell you that whole story. I stood where Oswald stood at the Texas Book Depository 10 years later, and I'll never, ever, ever believe that anyone could make that shot there. There's just no way. But that story's in the book, too, about all of that. But all these patterns are here. Our shadow government is real. I think it started basically when Kennedy was shot, and his brother, Robert, and then Martin Luther King, and on and on and on. And if we don't do something and stand up and stop this and stop criminals like Bill and Hillary Clinton. We have to put them in jail. If our government won't put them in jail because our government's too corrupt, then it's up to we the people. And if we don't stand up, we are going to lose our country. We will lose our freedoms, and we'll all be microchipped like McVeigh was back in Desert Storm, because they were testing that stuff now. Now the stuff they've got now is way better than that. And we will be microchipped in the New World Order and so forth, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now.
And you're doing it very well, if I may say so myself. And I'm excited to receive your book, Choosing the Light is the title of the book. And, of course, just go to the website. I'm sorry, give out the website, please.
Yeah, it's Light on Conspiracies.
There it is. Okay.
.com / Cody.
Okay.
lightonconspiracies.com / Cody. And my buddy, he's been doing research for like 30 years. He was down in Dallas for the last Kennedy thing
Right.
about the assassination. So there's a lot of information there on that site besides my little book. But what we're trying to do is get everyone together now and have a big wave of truth. It's the only thing, truth is the only thing that's going to go up against the shadow government. It's too big, it's too deep, it's got tentacles in the drugs business, the arms business, all the heroin and opium coming out of Afghanistan. It all goes back to the China White heroin with General Secord, Richard Secord and Shackley, that CIA agent that were running all the America ops and stuff.
Yep.
This thing is bigger and deeper than just the Clintons. But if we can expose it and get people used to seeing the patterns of these ops, that way they can't trick us and fool us anymore.
Well said. And we again, the fingerprints of the deep state, permanent state, shadow government, whatever we're going to call it, are on all of these. Every op that you mentioned, every incident that you mentioned, I truly believe that we're now coming to the point where there's going to be some level of disclosure. There has to be. Your comments in the last couple of minutes we've got, Donald Trump in the White House. Do you think that there's a possibility, given the fact that he's an outsider, that some of this could come to light?
Well, when you open the first page of this book, it says, "The day we see truth and do not speak is the day we begin to die." And Martin Luther King said that. And Trump, I think, is kind of like a similar vein of Martin Luther. He's trying to get the truth out. He's trying to make a change in our country. God bless Donald Trump. I voted for him. I don't agree necessarily with everything he says, but who does? I mean,
Really?
We've got all this division in our country and all of this stuff, and we need to unify as American people. We need to unify in the light. That's why I named this book Choosing the Light, because each of us have a choice of what we want to do. It doesn't matter if you're a burger cook or a multi-billion-dollar banker. You know what's right down in your heart, and it's time for us Americans to revitalize the soul of our country, and I think Donald Trump is doing that. Donald Trump is trying to, with all these sealed indictments and stuff, clean up things. I hope he's getting a bunch of people to snitch on the Clintons. The problem with the Clintons is if they find out someone's going to testify in the grand jury, those people always slip on a banana peel or stab themselves in the heart like the Dr. Lorich up in New York or any number of cases. In the book, I've got all kinds of details. The Clinton death list, that's old stuff.
Right.
But, but Donald Trump is trying to do that, so what he has to do is secretly indict people. And if the Clintons don't know that these people are going to testify, then they won't order the hits on them. Because believe me, the Clintons have been ordering hits on people. They hire black operators just like me down in Arkansas and other people who won't come forward now and talk like this. And they hire them to kill these people. It's pure and simple. It's not only corruption at the highest level, it's murder to cover up the corruption. And if we Americans keep putting up with this and we don't do anything about it, then we're going to suffer the consequences of our actions. These people are monsters. They're like Adolf Hitler in World War II. My uncle fought at the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes Forest.
Hey, so did mine. So did mine.
Pardon? Oh, did really?
Yeah, my uncle was there as well, and he was shot. He survived, but he was at the Battle of the Bulge, the very same location you just referenced.
Right, that's cool. But the thing is Hitler was a monster, and he had to be stopped. You can't talk to him. You can't. He's going to gas 6 million Jews. How are you going to sit down at lunch and tell the guy, oh, you need to stop that? He has to be forced to stop, and these Clintons and all are the same way. If we don't stand up to the shadow government and all of the stuff that they're doing, and they're corrupting the judicial system. I sat in solitary confinement. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months for something I did not do. And I have proof of it. I just couldn't get it into court because they would threaten me with death.
That's a hell of a
when
choice.
The Justice Department is converted over into a political arm for the establishment, then there is no justice. When policemen break the law, then there isn't any law. Amen. It's just a struggle for survival. And I hope Donald Trump can restore some measure of honor and integrity, because all our veterans that's suffering in the VA hospitals with the Gulf War syndrome and Agent Orange and all of these people who fought for our country like your uncle and all the men and good men and women who sacrificed for our country, they're making a mockery out of them by allowing these criminals to run our country and into the dirt and into the ground.
Amen.
I'm sorry to preach.
No. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did, because that shows your heart and your intent, and I think our audience appreciates that. We're at the end of the show. I cannot believe how quickly. I cannot.
Good Lord,
man! This went very quick. Cody, will you come back and visit with us at some future time?
Yes, sir. I'd be honored. There's so much more to cover, and I apologize for I'm talking real fast. I get excited and I get emotional, and I apologize for that.
You paid your dues to be that way, and I'll tell you something. I'm gonna order your book as soon as this show is over. Delivery by Christmas? Yes? No? Crapshoot?
No, it's a PDF file. If you click on it today, we set a site up over in Europe.
Okay.
With Ole, and then we have another site here in the United States we're setting up. It has tech problems. We're doing it because they're going to hit the PayPal. You remember Jim Mars's book when he wrote it about Sandy Hook?
Right. Yep.
And he set up a PayPal, and they hit it so bad they defund you.
Yes,
They've been censoring. There's a massive censorship thing going on right now.
Okay. Well, we're going to promote the heck out of it, Cody, and I want to thank you so much for your time tonight. And John will be in contact with you. You come back again. And our audience is they just love you. So thank you, my friend, for bearing your heart and soul.
Yes, sir. Thank you, and God bless America, sir.
All right. Folks, that'll do it for us. God bless you. Till tomorrow at 9, my program, and then 2, Joe and John's, and, of course, flagship show tomorrow at 7. 5 hours of programming, HAGMANNreport.com. Good night.